Hello and welcome to the Business of Authority. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And today we are going to try to change your perception of risk.
Yes, I like this.
So last week we made a bunch of suggestions about novel ways to, or interesting ways to monetize your expertise. And for anyone listening that these suggestions were new to, trying any one of them would probably feel like a risk. It'd feel risky, like you're putting something at risk. So we thought we would follow on last week's episode with a risk episode, because in my experience, people, at least people that I work with, a lot of them don't consciously think of some resistance that they're having to a suggestion or a possible course of action. They don't think of it consciously as risk. And I'll hear it coming, but I'll hear it in their feedback, or if we're talking about something, they'll say things like, but I'm not sure if that'll work, or I don't want to waste my time on this if it's not going to pan out, or, you know, how's this worked for other people? And what they're clenching up about is that they're not sure it'll work. And there is...
That's what makes it a risk.
Right. And like risk is the possibility of loss or injury, but hopefully no one's going to be packaging their expertise as like a squirrel suit jumper. But automatically you're never going to have perfect information when you need to make a decision. Never, ever, ever, ever. So there's always some uncertainty. And the question is around, okay, well, how much can we reduce the uncertainty, which will reduce the risk? And what is the likelihood of a loss of time or money or reputation? And what is the impact of that loss versus the upside of the potential upside of the thing? And since I work with a lot of people who are super duper engineering mindset, there's a lot of squishy gray area in there that they do not like.
Engineers don't like squishy?
No, which is good if you're building a bridge, but if you're thinking about how to package your expertise or update your marketing or niche down and specialize, these are not life-threatening situations, and they're probably not even business-threatening situations. So, but I'm not I'm not like a thrill junkie, not like a giant risk taker. It's about noticing. I think this episode for me is going to be about noticing when you are responding to uncertainty as a risk, and then deconstructing it and thinking like, okay, what's the likelihood? What would be the impact? And what's the potential upside? And, and not pushing all your chips into the middle of the table, because in case
it's
it
funny
does
you
happen.
said that, because as you first said that, I was thinking Annie Duke.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Like, which hands do you just fold and say, nope, took it this far, not going to do anymore, and which ones do you push to the end?
Yeah, that would be a really good companion episode, I think, to this, where it's like, and it's even a Seth Godin thing. It's like, it's a business thing. It's like, you don't want to bet so much that if you lose, you'll be wiped out.
Right.
On any given hand. That's not smart. It's you're playing the long game. You want to win more hands than everyone else.
And let's face it, for our kinds of businesses, that's pretty unusual that we're betting the house. Yeah. Right? Most of us are making small bets in the scheme of things. They feel large in the moment as you contemplate them, because they feel like such a shift, but you're not betting the house, you're not betting your life. Betting something much smaller and more manageable.
Right. I mean, we could even touch on that for a second, which is the, if you are running your own business, in theory, you could lose your house if you don't have like you're incorporated or something LLC, like separating your personal and your business finances. But people mitigate that risk by either becoming an LLC or an S Corp or something, separating that stuff. Having, errors and omissions insurance, depending on whatever area you're in. But there are ways to minimize that so that you don't have some horrible, nasty surprise that ends up, affecting your personal life as well. So right off the bat, you're probably used to doing this, right? You've probably, the biggest risk you probably have taken already, starting a business is probably the biggest risk you'll take.
Yeah, really.
In terms of the business stuff.
Yeah.
So the smaller things, like the ones I get, I'm just coming out of an email 365 course and 5-day podcast challenges coming up. And people, and I talk about podcasting and writing every day on my list as I'm leading up to those things. And the feedback that I get from, a lot of people is like, well, how do I know it's going to work? How do I know? Or like, I don't want to waste 6 months on a podcast that isn't going to get me what I want. And it's like, okay, well, I understand that. You're never going to have the answer to that question 100% up front. It's just not.
No, never.
Not going to happen. So minimize the likelihood of the failure. First of all, what is the potential upside and what is the worst case scenario downside? And then
reevaluate your worst case scenario because you probably overstated it if you're naturally risk averse.
Right. And the way that I would drill into that with someone if I was working with them is to split the downside into two parts. What's the likelihood that this is going to be a complete waste of time in the case of the podcast? And what would be the impact of that? It's actually pretty low. Mm-hmm. Right. And if the upside or sometimes I think in Annie Duke's book, she talks about the expected value or EV. I don't like that word expected value, but I guess it's subjective. So it's the value that you would predict, the upside, the potential upside, you can guesstimate at. Again, engineering mindset hates that, but you can, within a range, you can probably say, well, if it went great, I might end up talking to Steven Pressfield on the show. If it went not so great, I can't get anybody to come on. I can't think of anything to think about. People hate it. It's like, or no, really, it wouldn't be people hate it. It would be no one listens. Is really
nobody listens, right? But the flip side, on the other side, is you might talk to Steven Pressfield, or you might get a new client, right? And that would probably, depending on your business model, that would probably more than pay for the time that you spent doing the podcast. Right. Or there's some learning. I mean, I shouldn't say or, because this is a given with a podcast, is you'll be learning. I guarantee you'll be learning when you do a podcast, whether it's from your guest, whether it's from the research that you do to talk about a thing, whether it's the feedback people give you afterwards. I mean, you can't do a podcast without learning unless you're just hopeless.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah. You're going to learn, right? So if you put that in the win column, that's pretty much guaranteed. It's not why you start, probably.
Yeah, true.
But it is a nice fringe benefit. And it's the same with the email list. Like people are like horrified by the idea of committing to writing every day or even every weekday. And the thing I can guarantee is that it will crystallize their thinking in record time. Yeah. So, and without exception, people find that it's way easier than they expected. Because, not that they're going to stick with it forever, but they do. It's much easier than they expected because they thought it was going to be impossible. And it's really not. I interviewed 10 people for Doing Daily, which is a sort of limited run podcast about writing daily. And everybody was like, I thought it was going to be so much harder than weekly, but it's actually easier because I get way more ideas. So there's less blinking cursor on a blank page. Mm-hmm. But that aside, it's like, okay, if this feels like, if we agree, me and person I'm talking to, if we agree that this approach, daily writing or starting a podcast or whatever, changing your positioning, specializing on something, changing the headline on your LinkedIn. I mean, some people resist the smallest things. If we are in agreement that this could lead to this upside that we're looking for, so if we agree on that, then we say, okay, what is the bet we're really making here? Like, what are the chips you're pushing onto the table, and how bad would it be if you lost them, versus the potential upside of what we've agreed this could lead to, and really deconstruct it and think through, like, I jokingly say to people when they're like, public speaking is another one, like, so nervous about public speaking, and I'm just like, I mean, it's not like you're gonna get hit by lightning. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, maybe tear your pants. Like, I've seen that happen. Like, but it's still.
I had a guy faint once.
Wow. Okay, I haven't seen that.
Not because he was afraid. It was a medical thing, but he literally passed out in the middle of his presentation and fell off the stage. So,
Jeez.
yeah.
Okay, that's bad.
Yeah, I know. I probably shouldn't have said that. Now nobody's going to want to speak in public.
See,
that was a once in a
rule.
million thing.
Yeah. So have a Snickers bar before you go up and eat low blood
Exactly.
sugar. But it's just, I notice it a lot where the fear is inappropriate. It's inappropriately high based on what I see as the risk. So I think talking through it is the way to kind of like think for engineer types, like thinking through it and being like, okay, you're like on a scale of 1 to 5, like how sure are you that this thing is going to crash? Like this is not going to work, and come up with that number. And then it's like, okay, what is the impact if this thing doesn't work? And then come on a scale of 1 to 5. And then if you've got, because everybody's got limited resources, if you've got 4 or 5 different things that you could potentially do, like maybe you're deciding between a mailing list and a podcast, or on a listening tour, or doing cold outreach. There's probably a lot of things you're considering doing and you can't do them all. You could make a list. If you're a spreadsheet person, you can make a list of like, okay, my guesstimate is this, this, and this for the likelihood, the impact, and the upside. And, rank them in that way. And if you wanted to, that might help, and pick the one that seems the best bet.
Well, I think the other thing too, you said earlier, like for developer types, and this idea of wrapping your arms around what it means works for all kinds of personality types and interest levels, because it kind of forces you to, put it on paper or on a screen so you can look at it and think about it analytically. So even if you're more of a touchy-feely type, it gives you a place to look at this and to really assess the perceived risk and the actual risk. And we all have different tendencies toward risk. There's some people who are just like, oh, throw the dice, just do it. I don't care. I'm going to jump out of the airplane. I don't work. As long as I have the harness on the back or the parachute, I'm fine. I'm good. And somebody else would study it for weeks and would do a tandem jump first. So we all have different things that we're afraid of. Like I am much less, I take a lot fewer physical risks, but I take a lot more business risks, financial risks. They're easier for me. So be aware of your own personality and how you think about this. But I really like the writing it down and logically thinking it through. It's kind of like turning the light on and looking under the bed to make sure that there's no monsters there.
Right. Yeah. And especially if you're a soloist, you don't really, it might be a little too scary to turn the light on. I see this, like people just reject a thing out of hand because there's some uncertainty. And it's like, well, everything's going to have some uncertainty, and the stuff that has low uncertainty has low risk, and therefore is going to almost certainly have low reward. So making some bets, like I'm trying not to say you have to, but it's like, if you don't, then you end up trapped in your comfort zone. Yeah.
Trapped is the right word.
Right. And because you're just status quo all the time, which is your comfort zone, but it is not your safety zone. It's a dangerous zone to be comfortable as a business owner. Yeah,
because the world is going to change. We don't know how, but the world will change, and your comfort zone is going to change, and you're going to get blasted out of it instead of making your own decisions about how you change and grow and experiment.
Yeah, exactly. You'll be forced. Yeah. So, by most certainly financial reasons initially. So you touched on something with the parachuter thing that I wanted to mention that is strongly related. I'm reading Dan Ariely's new book, and I think it's called Misbelief. And he tells a story about a study. I think he personally ran a study of like X Games athletes and people like that are like jumping off mountains on a bicycle. And like literally, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it's terrifying. I'm like, I hope my kids never do that.
Yes, it's not in my wheelhouse for sure.
Yeah, me neither. But his question that he wanted to answer in the study was, are these people big risk takers in all areas of their life, or is it just this? And it was just that. They were extremely vanilla in other aspects of their life. So to sort of reinforce your point that you were just making a second ago, that if you're aware of the things that that make you more nervous, that can help. So for example, you might not be nervous about like replacing your internal systems with some no-code solution that, you've been doing something manually, like something that's not client-facing or something that's not public, really. It's just like back of the house stuff. Mm-hmm. That's not going to probably feel very well, who knows? I mean,
it depends.
It depends, right? I have non-technical clients who that would be very scared of that.
Yeah. It's like, what happens if it breaks? What am I going to do?
Yeah.
There's an element of risk. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, yeah. So it could help if you know that there are certain areas where you are that way, where you're extra risk averse, and ones where you're less risk averse. That would be a thing to get coached on, and sort of like, or find. So if you're like that, and you're like, oh, I do want this automation, so I don't have to hire, but I feel like I'll be trapped in a sort of Rube Goldberg machine of my own making, that I don't know how it works, and if it fails, like the money stops that day. So, right. So you're like, okay, what's the likelihood of that? We're not saying do no research, right, but there's an appropriate, but trying to get to zero uncertainty is procrastination. So you want to decrease the uncertainty, and you want to decrease the impact if the thing does happen. So you could think about it and say, okay, I'm just naturally terrified of technical systems in my business that touch money. So, okay, what could you do about that? Make a list. It's like, well, if I think this is important, I do want to do this. It's just like, it's a good idea. I'm just afraid of it because of the uncertainty. Then try and decrease the uncertainty. Like, I just did this with someone, and it's going to sound like obvious or not a big deal, but it was a big deal to the person, where really, really wanted to be on this sort of all-in-one platform that would run a lot of parts of their business.
Oh, I could feel why that would be scary.
Right.
Or feel risky. Yeah.
Right. And so, but it was like, yes, this would be good, but I am afraid of the downside. But it would be good if I could do something about the downside. And so it was like, well, let's just learn it. Let's just learn the platform, and just break through that. I mean, the fear was of the what's the right word? It's just the lack of knowledge. It was just like the black box. The fear was of the black box. And it's like, well, let's open it.
And that feels like, it's going to sound judgmental, but that feels like a healthy fear. Like, okay, I need to understand this, because whatever you do is going to get you to a better result when you understand the risks that you're taking. And just understanding the system, or perhaps delegating that to someone, is going to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like, what's plan B, right? So it was like, all right, so go watch all the introductory videos for this platform. It might take you 2 hours, but it's going to decrease the black boxiness of it, and then do the stuff that it's teaching you how to do. Okay, like, here's how to set up this, here's how to set up that. And it's like, and I could, and it made sense, because that could feel like a waste of time. It could feel like the kind of thing that you should outsource. But had this person outsourced it, then they would be held hostage, in a sense, by this third party, when really all it could have taken is like a half day or a day of getting comfortable with this, getting like a working knowledge of the system, and then just being like, oh, now I'm self-sufficient. And it's like, and the certainty goes way up that if something does go wrong, they can figure it out. And then the backup plan was, call me, right? And whatever the backup plan is. So it was like, okay, and then and it worked, right? It just like worked out great. So now the person is like,
in that scenario, what you're doing is you're cutting through the fear of not doing something that is very, very likely to advance you.
Right.
Right. And we all have those fears, whether that's, starting a podcast or it's this all-in-one system or maybe hiring a VA for the first time. I mean, those are normal, expected, fears. And I think it's really healthy when we can just kind of unpack them,
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I had a VA who did so much for me, but the one thing that she would not do, unless I almost had to put a gun to her head, was to do anything inside my ConvertKit. And she would she would program stuff, but she did not want to be responsible for hitting the send button because she was convinced that there would be a mistake.
Right.
And she was hyper vigilant about that and hated doing it. And so I just got to the point where I'm like, all right, fine, I'll handle that. Just don't do that. If I had something broke, she'd help me fix it. But yeah, and I always thought, gee, if you're a VA, that would be a really good thing not to be afraid of.
Right.
I mean,
it's
it limits you.
Exactly. And that's how I felt about, this person that just poked around, watched some videos and poked around and oh, this isn't, and I had enough knowledge of it to know that it was within their capabilities. It was really just a lack of information.
Yeah.
They just needed a little bit of self-education it was definitely, they were capable of it. So it was and then after I was you have a superpower now, right? You just saved yourself, I don't know, thousands of dollars, but more importantly, you've become self-sufficient in this key piece of your business, right? Mm-hmm. So if someone, I'm trying to think, for me, the core of my business absolutely is my mailing list for sure. So it's anything I don't even like, and I've experimented with not even using something like ConvertKit and just directly using services that are more direct. I ended up backpedaling from that, but for interesting reasons that we could talk about another time. But I want the risk, the likelihood and impact of any screw ups with my mailing list to be I want them to be very low, reasonably low for me, but it's quite low. So that means I've hired people to train me. When I moved to ConvertKit, I hired people to coach me on it, to train me on it. I've gone through, I learned the software since that's, since I did ultimately decide to use a normal platform for it. And
we're using the word normal a lot today between us,
I guess. But anyway, it's but I could see it was an unusual suggestion to say well, why don't you just learn how to use the platform? Because that feels like one of those things that the common sense, conventional wisdom would be no, that's not. Knowing ConvertKit is not a core piece of your business. Let's say it was ConvertKit. Being good at ConvertKit, or at least intermediate at ConvertKit, it's not really core to my business of whatever you want to call it, coaching or pricing consults. So it's the kind of thing that the normal business advice is outsource, but that's just a completely different. That's not our business model. Like having employees or dependencies like that need to be maintained, updated, replaced. It's a lot of friction if you're going to be a small, a company of one. So spending a half a day or paying someone to train you instead of do it is, I think, a good investment, a good ROI. But a lot of people will see it as no, that's a distraction. I could be spending time doing sales or marketing or delivery or something that's a little bit more in the mainstream of their business. And maybe that's true in some cases.
Well,
okay.
So here's what I'm putting myself in your shoes in this situation, and to me, that's your lead generation system. Is that email? I mean, it delivers the thing that you use to generate your leads. So it's a key part of your, whether you want to call it marketing or sales or both, your marketing, sales, delivery. So I could make an argument, even if you weren't as technical as you are, that you might want to do that. You might want to get smart enough to be able to make it do what you want, whether that's having somebody coach you. And absolutely you could outsource it. For myself, I like to touch things that touch clients and prospects.
Yeah.
I like to touch those things. Now, I wouldn't care as much about, like, if I had an internal system that was delivering stuff to clients, I might be okay if it was operational, like it was a Dubsado style system where you do your proposals and you hold all the work product inside. That'd be fine. I wouldn't mind outsourcing that as long as I understood how it worked first.
Yeah, like I outsource my accounting and stuff like that, like legal.
Yeah, I don't understand how that works.
Yeah. I don't insure myself. I have insurance, and I rent an office. I didn't buy the building. So, there are plenty of things that this isn't an anti-outsourcing thing. It's more like it was just a story to talk about the uncertainty and the way it can keep you trapped in a situation that's suboptimal. And if you're, certainly if you're working with a coach, but even if you have like a peer group or someone like that where you can kind of talk through, it's like, here's this thing I'm thinking about doing. I think this would be good, but I'm resisting it for these reasons. It feels risky or risk-like language. And then just talk it through, like, am I overestimating how bad it would be if I accidentally sent a bunch of emails to, to the wrong segment on my list, or if I accidentally sent 3 emails in one day to the entire list. Or here's a classic one. Again, it's on my mind because Email 365 just wrapped up, but a few people, this is pretty common in that workshop, where some people already have a mailing list, it's just not daily. And the question always comes up, should I start a second list? Should I, a daily one, and keep the weekly one and start a daily one? Sound familiar?
Yep.
Or should I tell the weekly people that I'm going to switch to daily and then just start sending daily? Or should I just start emailing daily? And like, people who unsubscribe, and people who don't. And my advice, generally speaking, you could talk me out of this for some good reason, but my default advice is just start emailing daily instead of weekly. And the people who were going to unsubscribe will unsubscribe anyway, and it'll work itself out. And maybe that's wrong, or maybe it's not wrong, but the panic inducing, like the idea is panic inducing. And but what, and then they see, and they do it, and then they see the unsubscribes, and it's like white knuckled.
Yep.
So I'm like, well, those people were never going to come over to the daily list anyway. And now you only have one list to manage instead of 2. And, like I said, there's exceptions, of course, but if you say, like, what's the risk? Like there's fear when I tell people, like, just start emailing. And the reason I say that is because of the 3, none of them is a clear winner, and that's the easiest one. So do that one. It's not like obvious that.
It's that fear when you see the numbers dropping that you've so carefully, especially if you have a small list, right? You've so carefully added each person to the list. Let me just tell a quick story. So I interviewed Pia Silva on Soloist Women. It drops, I think, next week, probably this week when this comes. But she pivoted her business from doing branding directly to entrepreneurs to this direct to graphic design and brand strategist training. And I said to her, so have you like made the shift? And she said, oh yeah. She said, we dropped 10,000 people from our mailing list. And I was like, whoa. So we're worried about like onesie, twosies, 5s and 10s. Here's somebody who said, I'm so committed. I'm prepared to drop 10,000 people from my mailing list that are not going to be interested in this message.
Right.
Yeah. So, it just depends on the scope of the risk that you want to take.
Yeah. And then the upside, right? So like if you imagine the I don't care which one of the three things you picked, but just to work through the scariest one, which is the easy one for you, is to just start increasing the frequency of your messages. What's, and then the panic, but what if everyone unsubscribes? It's like, well, how likely is that? Mm-hmm. And like, what really is the impact between the two other? But if we've decided that daily is something you want to do, and what all we're stuck on is the transition from weekly to daily, like, what are you really afraid of?
Yeah, pick one.
Yeah. Because it's going to happen no matter what. And you'll probably end up with more. My guess is no way to A/B this, but my guess would be that, and the data seems to indicate that there's some unsubscribes, more than normal unsubscribes at first. And within a week, you've got your daily people, like the people that made it through, the people that have been getting a lot out of the emails and are happy to get more. It's like, well, every single one of these, I can't wait to open. So I'm glad to have more. So I guess the point is, I'm trying and failing to not make this about daily emails, but what really is the likelihood that your whole list is going to unsubscribe? What really is the impact if your whole list unsubscribes? And just work through it.
Let's shift the topic to niching, because it comes up so often in both of our experience. And just this morning in my Slack community, somebody raised the question and said, hey, I'd be curious for feedback. I'm thinking about niching to this. My fear is I have these two possible new clients that are not in that vertical. Has anybody else niched successfully? And it was only up there for like 10 or 15 minutes, and two people immediately chimed in with just like such perfect answers of how they themselves had niched. And, I haven't seen, the interaction yet, but I'm guessing that was really helpful for this person to see, because we've all had that. It feels so big when you're in that moment and you think about, taking, like if you're serving two audiences and you're going to take one of them off, right, in your headline, or you've always said, I'm an X, and instead you're going to say, I serve these people doing this. Like, this is who I help and how. It feels so big because it feels like it's your headline. It's the sign on top of your house. Yeah. It's like you're shouting it from everywhere. But in fact, it's not as big a risk as it feels like.
Usually, yeah. It's pretty rare for someone to underestimate the risk. In the group of people that I talk to, it's almost unheard of for people to do something that I'd be like, whoa, have you thought that through? It never happens.
Yeah.
It's always the opposite. They're thinking it through too much, or they're not thinking about it at all, and they're just recoiling from the idea. But you just reminded me of another one that came up recently in Ditcherville, which was, I've been getting more and more of these examples of all-you-can-eat subscription services. We talked about it last week, I think, and the week before. And it's interesting. It's really interesting that it seems like a very easy thing, relatively easy thing for certain people to sell. Like, clients get it. Like, you don't have to explain it to them. Like, they pretty much understand it. But the risk is always about capacity. So for the person who's selling it, they're afraid that if they sell this all-you-can-eat package, then all their clients are going to like belly up to the buffet and fill their purse with shrimp, until the whole place is empty, which just doesn't happen. So it's like, okay, I can sit here and tell you that isn't going to happen. You're not going to believe me, but let's just say we can talk to a few other people who, like me, have offered all-you-can-eat subscriptions, and it just doesn't happen. Could it happen? Yes, but I think based on people with experience, it seems like an edge case. But let's say it does happen. So the likelihood is, people with experience are telling you the likelihood of the thing you're afraid of happening, the pocket shrimp people, is probably not going to happen. So low likelihood. What is the impact of that happening? Well, you'll be pretty busy. You'll be pretty busy for some amount of time. So what could you do to mitigate that impact, to decrease that impact? You can set expectations up front. There's certain things that you could say are out of bounds up front. There are throttling. You could put throttling into the agreement, kind of like unlimited data on your phone, but if you hit 5 gigabytes in a month, it'll slow your speed down. So like there are things you can do if the impact would knock you out of the game. If the impact would knock you out of the game, even though it's a remote likelihood, then okay, then put some guardrails in place for the unlikely event that will not affect anyone except for people who are like, whoops, edge case happened. So, like, let's deconstruct this instead of just out of hand rejecting the idea of an all-you-can-eat subscription because someone might steal all the shrimp, and then what? It's like you have more control than that. You do have more control over it than that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's funny. I have two reactions to that. One is, yes, if that makes you feel solid enough to go ahead and take the risk and do it, then do it. The other side is I get nervous when I see a person versus like a big company that has this, 27-page list of the terms of engagement.
Oh yeah.
There's a balance.
For that either.
Yeah, there's a balance with that. But that is a concern. And usually it's that there is like one person or one client company that you could have caught in the early stages, but you didn't know enough yet. Right, to catch it, and they get through and they do that. And so then it's, do you change the rules for everybody, or do you just say, client X, I'm sorry, this isn't a fit. Right. Here's your money back, or we're going to stop working together. And then you just do a better job of screening. And, still, the occasional one is going to get through that's a bad fit because, we're not clairvoyant and circumstances change, clients swap out. But, you do your best within the parameters that you've set, the guardrails that you're comfortable with.
Right. And the this is specific to the example, but just to wrap it up, because the likelihood is low, if you have 10 or 20 clients signed up for this, at the most, one or maybe two are a little bit, pigs at the buffet. But the other 10 or 20 or like 9 or 18, the rest of them will be low capacity demand, low demand. So it's like, it kind of balances out anyway. Mm-hmm. But anyway, the
80-20 curve.
Yeah, the big picture is, but everything you said is true too. I mean, you could just disengage. There's all these things that you could do.
Yeah.
But the important piece is to drill into the fear of uncertainty and say like, okay, what am I actually afraid of here? And, this. Okay, what could we do? Like, how likely do you think that is? 5 out of 10 or whatever. It's like, okay, how could we get that down to a 3 or a 2? Well, we can have a better qualification process up front. Okay, let's do that. And then what about the impact if somebody is taking all the food? Like, what's the impact there? Well, what could you do to decrease the impact of that? Well, I could do all these things and blah, blah, blah. Or if it's just unsustainable, you can let them go. So once you get in there and you're like, okay, let's talk about it and get into it, then sometimes you can take what seems like a terrifying idea and turn it into, I could do this.
As you were saying that, there's something else that occurred to me is I think sometimes there's a fear that's more about the qualitative experience than about the fact that like a client's going to take advantage of me. And sometimes there's a message in that. Like, oh, yeah, you don't want to do a membership because you really don't want ongoing voices in your head, right? You really prefer doing project work. You'd like the baseline of having membership revenue come in that feels a little bit more certain, perhaps. But boy, you really don't want to do that. So sometimes that fear is something else. And then it's got something to teach you. So, regardless, it's really helpful to dig into the fear and understand what's going on before you make a decision.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like I would almost categorize that as like a high level strategic decision where you've decided that this thing is not for me for a reason that's not going to change. You know what I mean? It's almost like a values level. It's not quite values level, but it's a very high level reason why, like, yeah, this isn't for me. Like, so someone replied to one of my emails about this and said, I just don't like the idea of going to bed not knowing if I have to work the next day. And I was like, well, that's good to know. I mean, I don't see any reason why that would need to be a requirement. You know, you could still have total control over your schedule, even in an all-you-can-eat model. But okay, that's a good thing to know. It's like a personality level thing.
Yeah, there are people who feel that in their head. It's like, I'm married to a person like that. It's like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen today, but I have to be available in case something does. Right. And that creates a feeling in certain kinds of people that feels like a deadline, even though it isn't. And it's, it's easier to conform the circumstances to your personality than it is to change your personality. But sometimes we do. Like sometimes we, make choices to push ourselves in a new direction.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Way easier.
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like we've made our point. What do you think? Do we leave any stones unturned?
With us, there's always we overturned a few extra, and we probably left a couple more unturned, but that'll give us an idea for next time.
Exactly. All right, cool. Okay, folks, so that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And we hope you join us again next time for The Business of Authority. Bye.
Bye-bye.